I usually come here at 7:10. The cafe smells the same every morning, bread crust and the faint echo of yesterday's rain. But today it's quieter than usual. I slide into my usual corner by the window, where the light hits the table just enough to warm my hands. My phone buzzes with a half-read message I never sent, and I let it sit. Coffee arrives in a chipped ceramic mug. The barista knows me by name, but not enough to ask how I'm doing. Then she appears. She's standing near the counter, holding a notebook like it weighs more than it should, hair tucked behind one ear, mid-40s. Everything about her deliberate and calm. I notice the crease near her eyes before I notice the way she smiles at the barista. Quick, almost apologetic, like she's afraid her presence might bend the room. My stomach flips. I hate that, and I hate noticing it. She orders the same drink I've seen her have before, a black coffee, no sugar. I almost laugh because I remember it from last week. Almost, but my mouth stays closed. I fold my napkin, then unfold it, careful not to meet her eyes, but she does anyway. Just a brief glance, enough to make me think she remembers me too. I tell myself I'm imagining things. The cafe hums with quiet conversation. I pull my notebook toward me, pretending to write something, but I only doodle lines along the margin, pause, then glance at her again. She flips open her notebook, scribbles something with a sharp pencil, pauses, and looks out the window. The light catches her face just so, shadows under her cheekbones, the tiniest crease in her brow. I wonder what she's thinking about. I hear her laugh softly at the barista's joke. I can't remember the last time someone laughed like that around me. It's not loud or showy, just easy. I sip my coffee and pretend to focus on my writing, but my eyes keep flicking toward her hands as they move across the page, curling around the pencil, resting on the notebook's edge. She doesn't notice, or if she does, she doesn't show it. I've spent years learning to be quiet in public. Unsent texts stacked on my phone, fingers hovering over the keyboard and never sending. Pause thoughts in crowded rooms. Little habits that say more than I ever could. And yet, here, across the room, she seems to be noticing anyway. The moment stretches. She closes her notebook with a soft thump that makes me startle just slightly. Then she looks up, and for a second our eyes meet. She tilts her head, a small, deliberate gesture, like she's thinking about something she hasn't said yet. Then, in a tone that's casual but pointed, she says, "You just might surprise me yet." I freeze. Coffee halfway to my mouth, pencil in hand. The words feel like a door opening, a crack I wasn't expecting. I don't know if she's teasing or serious, but something in the way she said it, quiet, patient, slightly amused, makes my chest tighten. I nod, because I don't know what else to do, and she smiles briefly before turning back to her notebook. The scrape of pencil on paper becomes louder in my head. I leave the cafe 15 minutes later, my notebook untouched except for the margin lines. Outside, the sky is pale gray, and my phone buzzes. A text from an unknown number, simple and strange. "Coffee again tomorrow?" I pause, thumb hovering over the screen. I don't know if I should answer, but I can't stop smiling that I went back the next morning, same cafe, same corner. My coffee arrived before she did, and I caught myself staring at the door every few seconds. When she walked in, the bell over the door rang softly, and my chest tightened without permission. She gave a small wave, nothing grand, just a tilt of the hand, but it made the room feel smaller, warmer. We ended up at adjacent tables by chance. I watched her open her notebook again, pencil poised. After a minute, she looked up, as if deciding whether to speak. "Did you ever try writing when you were a kid?" she asked. I blinked. Didn't expect that. A little. Mostly scribbles, I said. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet cafe. She smiled, a trace of nostalgia in her eyes. I used to write letters I never sent. To people who didn't exist, or maybe to the people I wanted to be. Her hands traced the notebook's edges. Divorced young. Too many moves. Letters were the only thing that stayed still. I nodded slowly, imagining her younger self folding paper carefully, a life stretched thin. I wanted to ask more, but instead I said nothing, letting the silence fold between us like a shared sheet of paper. The risk of talking to her wasn't a secret. She was 45, calm, untouchable in her world of patience and appointments. I was 22, aimless, fumbling through rent and odd jobs. There was a small, sharp boundary I didn't cross, though some part of me wanted to test it, just a little. We drank our coffee in quiet. The steam curled between us, and I noticed how her fingers wrapped around the mug, gentle, careful. I wanted to reach across the table, touch the warmth of her hand, but I stayed still, staring at the rim. My mind wandered. What if I leaned forward? What if she laughed at something I said? What if she liked me back? The scenarios flickered, fragile as light on a puddle. At some point, she asked softly, "Do you always carry notebooks around?" "Yeah. Helps sort things out." I smiled, awkward, folding a napkin twice before letting it lie. "Good," she said. Her eyes lingered longer than they should. "I like seeing someone try." She closed her notebook then, pushed it slightly toward me, as if offering a piece of herself. I reached out almost reflexively, brushing my fingers against hers. It was barely a touch, barely a contact, but the air between us changed. Her smile didn't falter. Her gaze held mine for a beat longer than necessary. I left the cafe with my chest full of words I couldn't say, imagining her gesture in slow motion. It wasn't just a brush of fingers, it was acknowledgement, recognition, something that didn't need explanation, but everything meant. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I didn't expect to see her that afternoon, but there she was, leaning against the counter at the bookstore where I sometimes hid from life. The smell of paper and old glue made the air sticky, almost comforting. She had her notebook again, pencil tapping softly against the page, like a quiet metronome. I lingered by the shelf, pretending to browse, pretending not to notice the way her fingers curled over the pencil. She looked up, and our eyes met. She smiled, small, careful. I wanted to step closer, wanted to say something clever, but my tongue tangled in the usual hesitation. "Looking for anything?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. My voice felt small. "Just wandering." She nodded, but didn't return to her notebook immediately. She shifted slightly, the light catching her hair. I could feel the pull of wanting to reach across the aisle, to close the space between us, but I didn't. Something in her posture, a subtle retreat, shoulder angled away, said maybe I shouldn't. A friend of mine appeared then, waving from the end of the aisle. My pulse thudded. I smiled faintly, and she glanced toward the interruption, eyes soft but guarded. I realized she wasn't just cautious about me. She was aware of the boundaries we'd both skirted without speaking. When the friend left, the aisle quieted again. I found myself lingering near her table, fingers brushing the spines of books I didn't care about. She looked up, eyes tracing the tops of the shelves, then back at me. There was tension in the silence, a pause thick enough to cut. "Do you ever think about what you'll do next?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said. My words felt hollow even to me. I wanted to say more, to confess that I thought about her, that I imagined her hand in mine. But the word stuck. She tilted her head, pencil hovering over the page. I noticed how her lips pressed together for a second before releasing, as if weighing whether to say something forbidden. My throat went dry. I edged closer, pretending to look at a book, heart hammering. She didn't pull back, not entirely, but the subtle shift, one shoulder forward, one back, made me hesitate. Her breath caught ever so slightly when our hands brushed as I adjusted a book on the shelf. I could have leaned closer. The moment was fragile, heavy with unsaid things. I imagined pressing my lips to hers, the warmth of her hand curling around mine. But before it could happen, she straightened, closed her notebook with that soft thump, and looked at me. Her gaze held mine for a beat too long. She smiled, the kind that hides more than it shows, then said, almost like a challenge, "You're persistent, I'll give you that." And then she turned, walking away. The pencil case in her bag shifted slightly, almost falling, and I didn't reach out. I didn't move. I stayed behind, fingertips brushing the edge of the shelf, wondering if persistence was enough, or if it ever would be. I found her sitting on the bench outside the small park near the office where she sometimes met clients. The air was cool, almost sharp, and the sun was low, brushing everything in muted gold. She had her notebook again, but it was closed this time, resting on her lap like a shield. I hesitated before sitting down. My legs felt heavy, words lodged somewhere between my throat and my ribs. She glanced up, eyes soft but guarded. "You came," she said, almost surprised. Yeah," I muttered. My hands curled into fists in my pockets. I wanted to say more, but the pause stretched too long. We sat in silence for a while. A dog barked somewhere. A leaf skittered across the path. I watched her fingers, tapping lightly on the notebook cover. It was an insignificant motion, but my chest tightened. I realized I'd been imagining this moment all day, every small detail. "I saw him today," she said suddenly. The words dropped like stones. "Oh," my voice barely carried. "Who?" "My neighbor. He asked about me. About dinner plans." I said no. She looked away, eyes tracing a crack in the pavement. I don't know why it matters, but it did. And I hated feeling jealous. I wanted to reach across the bench, to tell her I understood, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, letting the confession sink between us, letting it breathe. "I don't usually let anyone get close," she added, voice quieter now. "Not like this. Not with someone younger, not." She cut off. A sharp inhale, like she'd said too much already. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could manage was, "I get it." She laughed softly, a little bitter, and I noticed how fragile it sounded. Her hand brushed against mine, just barely, and I froze. The warmth lingered longer than it should, and I could feel the hesitation echoing in her palm. "I shouldn't feel this for you," she murmured. "But I do, and I don't know what to do with it." I swallowed, heart hammering. The words were raw, unpolished, exposed in the cool autumn air. I wanted to tell her I felt it too, that every pause, every glance had been a confession in disguise. But the fear of breaking the fragile balance between us held my tongue. We sat together, the park quiet except for the occasional cough of distant walkers. I watched her breathe, the faint rise and fall of her chest. She looked at me, eyes steady now, searching, and I realized she was waiting for something. A word, a gesture, and I wanted to give it. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, barely above a whisper, "Do you want me to stay?" Her eyes met mine, and for a second, it felt like the world had folded in on itself. The question hung between us, unresolved, heavy with everything we hadn't said. She didn't answer. Not yet. The cafe smelled the same when I walked in that morning. Sunlight fell in stripes across the wooden floor, dust motes drifting lazily. But she wasn't there. I waited, stirring my coffee more than I should, eyes scanning the door every few seconds. I tried to tell myself she was late, busy, something ordinary. But something felt off. She came 20 minutes later, brisk, notebook clutched to her chest. No smile, no glance my way. She ordered, paid, and sat, facing away from me, like a deliberate distance. The warmth I had carried from the park a few days ago didn't exist here. The space between us felt heavier than usual, filled with quiet omissions instead of words. I tried to catch her eye when she turned to scribble in her notebook, but she avoided it, just a flicker of movement, then down again. I felt the shift like a gust of wind, subtle but cold. "What's different?" I asked finally, voice too small. "Nothing," she said. Her tone clipped, precise. But I saw it, the slight tremor in her fingers, the tight line at the corner of her mouth. I tried to joke, ease the tension. "Coffee tastes better with company, you know." She didn't answer. Instead, she scribbled faster in the notebook, pencil scratching like a whisper I couldn't reach. My chest tightened. Later, when she left, I noticed a folded piece of paper sticking out from her bag. She didn't pick it up. I thought about chasing her down, but something held me back. That night, My phone lit up with a message I hadn't expected, a photo of her laughing with someone else. Not me, not the park, someone I didn't know. And there was a note. He stopped by? I almost told him. Almost. I stared at it for a long time. Confusion, hope, and withdrawal tangled together. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, words forming, dissolving. I miss you. Are you okay? Do you want to meet? None of them sent. I walked past the cafe the next morning. Her usual seat by the window was empty. The mug was gone, the notebook closed and left behind like a placeholder for something she wasn't ready to claim. I didn't enter. I didn't knock. I just stood there for a moment, feeling the space she had vacated as if it were a tangible thing. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. I thought about all the small gestures, the touch of her hand, the tilt of her head, the way she let me sit beside her without saying no. They were still there in memory, but somehow unreachable. I realized the rules had changed. The distance wasn't accidental anymore. Something private, complicated, hers, had entered the space between us, and I wasn't invited to decipher it. I left, walking slowly along the street, glancing back at the cafe once. Her notebook sat on the table, alone, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. And that was enough to make the quiet ache that I found her in the kitchen of her apartment, early evening light spilling through the window and landing on the counter where her notebook lay closed. She was making tea, hands careful around the kettle, stirring slowly, as if the motion could steady something inside her. I froze in the doorway, unsure if I should step closer or turn away. The apartment smelled faintly of baked bread and something floral, laundry detergent, maybe. Ordinary, unremarkable, and yet it felt charged, full of a quiet possibility I hadn't dared touch. She glanced up, eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, the pause between us was longer than words could hold. I realized how much I had rehearsed this in my head. The apology, the explanation, the soft laugh we might share after. But in reality, it was heavier, slower. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said finally. Her voice was careful, cautious, not asking, just stating. I almost didn't, I admitted, stepping closer. My hands itched to reach for hers, but I kept them at my sides, letting the hesitation speak instead. But I had to. She set down the teapot, hands lingering over the cup, and looked away for a second. I could see the shift, the weight of restraint, the fear of what might be lost if she let this go too far. I didn't know if I should say anything, she murmured. Her fingers twitched slightly, brushing the rim of the mug. Not because I didn't want to, but I wasn't sure it was safe. Or right. Or, her words trailed, unfinished, leaving space for everything we'd left unspoken. I stepped closer, slowly, letting my presence fill the distance without forcing it. I don't want safe. I don't want easy. I stopped, swallowed, and met her gaze. I just want you to know. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she reached for the cup I had brought, their fingers brushing, just a whisper of contact, and I felt it. The small, trembling acknowledgement that we could risk this, even a little. Okay, she said softly. Not a promise, not a confession, just an acceptance of the moment. Her lips curved almost imperceptibly, just enough that I noticed. I nodded, too, smiling quietly, letting the tension dissolve in the simple human connection between us. Hands still not fully entwined, eyes still wary, but present. The kettle hissed gently in the background, steam curling between us, carrying with it everything we hadn't dared say before. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't perfect. But it was enough to hold the space, enough to let us be seen by each other without pretense. I stayed. She stayed. And for a while, that was all that mattered. Weeks passed. The cafe's corner by the window, my usual, felt the same, and yet it didn't. She arrived, black coffee in hand, notebook tucked under her arm, and sat without announcement. I was already there at 8:47 a.m. As always, fingers wrapped around the chipped mug, watching the steam rise in the quiet sunlight. We didn't need to talk much. Sometimes we shared a bench outside the bookstore, sometimes the quiet of her kitchen, tea between us, hands brushing over cups or notebooks. Routines settled around us, small and deliberate. The way she stirred her coffee, the way I folded my napkin twice before letting it lie, the way our eyes met for just a second longer than necessary. It wasn't perfect. Some mornings she was late or distracted. Some afternoons I left the cafe empty-handed, a book unopened, words unspoken. But we learned the rhythm of each other, the small pauses, the gestures that mattered more than any declaration. One afternoon, she laughed softly at a joke I barely remembered making, and for a second I caught myself thinking about the park bench where she first let her walls drop. The memory wasn't sweet or cinematic. It was quiet, a folding of moments into something warm. We shared black coffee, tea, and little silences that spoke louder than our words. A stray pencil on her notebook reminded me of the first day I noticed her hands curling around it. The cracked mug on my table carried the memory of first glances. Every ordinary object became a vessel of quiet understanding, a testament to what we'd built without spectacle. I didn't need a confession, a climax, or a dramatic gesture. Love, in this shape, was folded into everyday moments. It was in remembering someone's order, in the pause before a reply, in reaching for a cup of tea together and letting fingers brush just so. Sometimes, when the cafe emptied and sunlight slanted across the tables, we would just sit, looking at each other over the rim of our mugs. And the world outside, the noise, the schedules, the distance, faded, leaving the space between us measured only by subtle smiles, quiet acknowledgments, the easy comfort of presence. I think about that first day, the notebook she closed and the words she said. "You just might surprise me yet." She did. Slowly, deliberately, through the quiet friction of routine and hesitation, she did. And now, I sip my coffee, glancing at her across the table, and it feels earned. Real. Ordinary in the best way. She tilts her head, fingers curling lightly around her mug, and I know, without a word, everything that matters. The pause, the glance, the quiet. Some things don't need speech. Some things only need to be felt. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?